Otham Carroll Wallace was born on January 15, 1981, into a united and loving family in Anaheim, an Orange County city in California, United States. She was the daughter of Linda Wallace, who worked as a secretary at the Orange County Superior Court. Otham had two older sisters, April Wallace, who later married and changed her last name to Nunez, and Amber Wallace, whose married last name became Sabo. Amber tragically passed away from cancer in 1987 when Otham was just 6 years old. Otham was an outstanding student, always earning the highest grades in her class, and was well loved by her peers. She enjoyed water-related activities, particularly swimming and fishing. When asked about her aspirations, she shared that she dreamed of becoming an artist. In the late 1980s, Otham had a close friend from school named Maria del Rocio Alfaro, known as Rossi. Rossi would often visit the Wallace home in the Colinas de Anaheim neighborhood and even lived with the family for a while. Rossi was born on October 12, 1971, in Anaheim. Her mother, Sylvia Alfaro, emigrated from Mexico and settled near Disneyland, where Rossi's father worked. However, Rossi's father was a violent alcoholic who abused his wife and daughter. Rossi's childhood was marked by violence and poverty, and at just 13 years old she became addicted to various substances. Struggling financially, Rossi began stealing money from her mother's purse. She associated with people who led her down a destructive path, worsening her addiction and behavior. By the time she was 15, Rossi was pregnant with Emmanuel Cuevas' child, but Emmanuel did not take responsibility for fatherhood. Rossi raised her son Daniel as a single mother. Though she managed to control her addiction during pregnancy, after the baby was 3 months old, Rossi fell back into drug use. At the same time, Rossi's father abandoned the family, leaving her mother, Sylvia, to cope with both Rossi's drug problems and raising a baby. In desperation, Sylvia sent Rossi to live with her grandmother in Mexico for 5 months, hoping the change would help. Rossi returned to California with no signs of improvement, and her situation worsened. She began staying out at night, and Sylvia would frequently find her on the streets, dirty, hungry and without shoes. By the time she was 17, Rossi was pregnant again, this time with Manuel's second child. During this pregnancy, Rossi lived with the Wallace family, who opened their home to her during her difficult time. However, her behavior, exacerbated by her drug addiction, began to strain her friendship with April, Otham's eldest sister. In 1989, when both women were around 18 years old, April decided to distance herself, although they remained in contact. Rossi would often ask April to drive her places, since she didn't have a car and had limited driving skills. Despite Rossi's troubled behavior, the Wallace family continued to be supportive. However, their kindness would ultimately have tragic consequences. On June 15, 1990, Rossi was staying at the home of Manuel, the 18-year-old father of her second child. He had been waiting for their third child to be born. That morning, Rossi went out at 11 a.m. to search for drugs. A friend took her to an area known as Little Tijuana, where she was informed that a man named Huero was selling drugs at his house. Rossi left her baby with Manuel and went with another girl to buy narcotics. After completing the transaction, the young women returned to Juan's apartment, where, in addition to Rossi's young son, there was Antonio Reynoso, a man she knew who had been released from prison the previous day. The group began injecting a mixture of cocaine and heroin around 2 p.m. Once the women had finished what they had bought, Antonio continued offering more stimulants to Rossi in exchange for using her needle and other drug-related implements. At that point, Rossi was using up to 50 doses daily, so despite the extra drugs Antonio provided, she was not fully satisfied and still craved more. In her desperation, Rossi told Antonio she had left a video recorder at the home of the family she had been living with and was willing to sell it. Both Rossi and Antonio, accompanied by an unidentified man, went to the Wallace home. Upon arriving, Rossi left Antonio's care and went inside. Her plan was to steal valuables that could later be traded for drugs. Knowing the family's routine, she thought the house would be empty. Unfortunately, that day, little Autumn had been picked up early from elementary school, Dr. Jonas E.D.K., by her friend Christina. At around 2:30 p.m., the two girls went to their homes. When Autumn arrived at her house, she found it empty, so she passed the time cutting paper dolls. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. Autumn approached cautiously, aware of the risks of opening the door to strangers, but seeing Rossi's friend April, whom she recognized, she let her in. Rossi asked to use the bathroom, and Autumn, trusting her, allowed her inside. However, things took a sinister turn. After being seen by Autumn, Rossi could not go through with her original plan to steal without leaving a witness. In a horrifying decision, Rossi concluded that the only way to solve her problem was to eliminate Autumn. On the way to the bathroom, Rossi grabbed a kitchen knife. Once in the bathroom, she called Autumn over, pretending she needed help cleaning some eyelashes that had come out. The 9-year-old girl agreed to help, unaware that this simple act would lead to a fatal outcome. As Autumn turned around, Rossi violently attacked her with the kitchen knife, stabbing her repeatedly. Meanwhile, the two men waited outside with Rossi's young son, unaware of the horrific crime taking place just a few meters away. After killing the innocent girl, Rossi proceeded with her plan to steal valuables. She gathered items including a portable TV, a phone, a video game console, and the video recorder she had mentioned earlier. With everything packed, Rossi took the knife used in the attack and returned to the car with the men, heading back to Little Tijuana. Later that afternoon, around 5:15 p.m., April returned home and immediately noticed something was wrong. The house was in disarray, with items scattered everywhere. The closet in the hallway was open and things were thrown around. April called for Autumn but received no response. When she entered her sister's room, she realized that the TV and mirror were missing and clothes were strewn across the floor. Concerned, April left the house and went to a neighbour's home. Around 5:40 p.m., Linda, the mother, returned from work. April met her and informed her not only had the house been robbed, but Autumn was also missing. Horrified, Linda rushed into the house to search for her daughter. Noticing that the phone was also gone, Linda asked April to call the police from a neighbour's house. As the authorities were notified, the family began searching the home for the missing young girl. At that time, Linda's main fear was that her daughter had been kidnapped by the person who had stolen from their home. As she approached the back of the residence, she prepared herself for the worst. Upon entering the bathroom, she found a scene far worse than anything she could have imagined. Her youngest daughter, Autumn, was lying lifeless on the ground, her blood spilled around her. Emergency services arrived at the scene, and Sheriff Richard Olson was the first to arrive. Realizing that one of the family members had been violently killed, he called for further investigation. Tim Giffin, an investigator with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, arrived at 7:20 p.m. The investigators quickly noticed that there were no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Autumn may have known the person who ended her life. Authorities set up a command post outside the Wallace residence, while forensic experts searched the home for evidence, including fingerprints and fibres. At the same time, agents interviewed neighbours, but no one had heard anything suspicious that afternoon. However, 3 separate neighbours mentioned seeing a 1970 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, either gold or brown, parked in front of the house. They also reported seeing 2 Hispanic men standing near the house, one holding a child of approximately 1.5 years old. Based on the descriptions, the police created a composite sketch of one of the men who had been seen in front of the house that afternoon, At around 11:15 p.m, Rossi passed by the Wallace house with Manuel and their young son Manny. She asked to speak to April, but the authorities denied her access. The next day, investigators discovered that fingerprints found at the crime scene matched Rossi's. Remembering that witnesses had mentioned seeing two Hispanic men with a child, the investigator questioned Rossi at the police station, but she denied any involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, the autopsy results were revealed, showing that Otum had suffered over 50 head injuries, along with injuries to her chest and back. The fatal wounds had been inflicted to her heart and larynx. On June 23rd, Otum was buried at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, California. Family and friends, including her classmates, attended a memorial service at Magnolia Church to pay their respects. The following day, June 24th, a woman named Maria Ruela gave a bag of clothes to April, claiming it belonged to Rossi, who frequently stayed at her home with Manuel. Maria explained that a few days earlier, Rossi had asked her to leave the bag outside, saying she would be going to Mexico the next day, but Rossi never returned for it. Detectives later obtained a court order to search the bag. Inside, they found boots and sports shoes with blood on the soles. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Rossi. The tread marks on the shoes also matched those found at the crime scene. With this evidence, the police obtained an arrest warrant for Rossi. Rossi was arrested the next day. After her arrest, she waived her right to an attorney and the right to remain silent, allowing herself to be questioned for more than 4 hours on video. By this time, any narcotic substances that could have affected her judgment at the time of the crime were no longer in her system, so a toxicology test was not conducted. During the interrogation, Rossi confessed to killing Otum and stealing from the Wallace residence. She explained that she knew the family's work and school schedules and believed the house would be empty. She insisted that she was solely responsible for Otum's death and denied that the two men who had accompanied her to the house were aware of her plans to steal. However, there were inconsistencies in Rossi's statements. Initially, she said that one of the men helped her place the stolen items in the car, but did not enter the house. She later changed her story, suggesting that the man may have entered the house after all. However, later Rossi implied that the individual had entered the residence and even reached the back bedroom. When questioned about her motives for ending Otum's life, Rossi stated that she wanted to prevent the girl from identifying her as the person responsible for the robbery. She also revealed that when she took the knife to the bathroom, she spent several minutes considering what to do. Rossi told the police that the vehicle in which the Wallace family arrived at the house was an old dark blue Camaro, and she didn't know the driver's identity. However, the police confronted her about the details of the car, as several witnesses had described it as a gold or brown Monte Carlo. Despite this, Rossi stuck to her initial statement. On July 10, 1990, Julio Antonio Reynoso contacted the police to identify himself as the man in the composite sketch that had been circulated. When questioned by detectives, Reynoso confirmed that he had not been involved in the crime and became a key witness in the case against Rossi. At that point, the second man had yet to be identified. While the investigation continued, the Wallace family hired private investigator W. Swana from the international research firm. After Rossi's confession, she was charged with first-degree murder, residential burglary and robbery. As previously mentioned, Rossi was in her third pregnancy at the time of the crime. She was transferred to Orange County Jail while awaiting trial, and during November 1990, she gave birth to twin boys, making her a mother of 4. In mid-November 1990, a preliminary hearing took place in which no defence was offered. This meant that no facts other than those presented by the prosecution were introduced to mitigate the legal consequences for Rossi. By the end of the month, prosecutor Charles Middleton of the Orange County District formally charged Rossi with first-degree murder, residential burglary, and robbery. He also stated that Rossi had used a deadly weapon in the killing of Otum. Additionally, the prosecution pointed out two special circumstances. First, that the crime had occurred while Rossi was committing a burglary, and second, that it had taken place during the commission of a first-degree robbery. Given these charges, the prosecution intended to seek the death penalty. For Rossi's defence, it seemed that securing a life sentence would be difficult. In February 1992, just 11 days before jury selection was set to begin, her defence attorney, William Munro, filed a request for special instructions behind closed doors with the court. Rossi insisted on pleading guilty to the charges despite her lawyer's objections. She also shared with her legal team that a man named Beto had been directly involved in the crime. At first it was thought that Beto was a man named Robert Frias Gonzalez. However, after questioning Robert and his sister, Rosalinda Gonzalez, he was ruled out as a suspect. William Munro insisted that Rossi identify Beto to help her case, but she refused, fearing possible retaliation against her family. The next day the court met with Rossi and her defence attorney. The court explained that, according to Article 108 of the Criminal Code, it could not accept a guilty plea in a capital case without the explicit consent of the defendant's lawyer. This led to two options. Rossi could request a new lawyer, or she could accept William's recommendations. Ultimately, Rossi pleaded not guilty to all charges, denying the special circumstances and accusations regarding the weapon presented by the prosecution. A week after this closed hearing, and just a few days before the trial, William Munro filed a motion to suppress the evidence from Rossi's recorded confession. He argued that drugs had impaired her judgment and rationality when she made the statement, and that the confession had been obtained without a lawyer present. The court denied the motion, ruling that the confession was voluntary and that the amount of drugs in her system had not affected her ability to knowingly waive her rights. On March 16, 1992, the trial began, lasting just under 2 weeks. During opening statements, prosecutor Charles Middleton presented explicit photographs of the crime scene while detailing the horrific death of Otum. He explained that after killing the girl, Rossi had stolen various items from the house, which he later sold or exchanged to obtain more drugs. During one of the hearings, the prosecution played Rossi's initial confession. In contrast, the defence presented a different version of events. The defence argued that while Rossi initially confessed to the crime, she later claimed that she had been coerced into participating in Otum's death. Rossi told her lawyer that a man who had driven them to the Wallace house with Antonio had threatened her and her family if she didn't participate in the attack. This man was the alleged Beto, whom Rossi had previously mentioned but refused to identify, fearing for the safety of her 4 children. However, the prosecution insisted that Beto never existed, arguing that the defendant would change her official statement for a second time, which diminished her credibility. They also presented evidence showing that the only 2 people present at the scene were Rossi and Otum. Throughout the trial, the prosecution presented extensive forensic evidence recovered from the crime scene and called several witnesses to testify. One of them, April, testified that he had tried to call Otum around 4:30 p.m. on the day of the crime to warn her that he would be late for work, but the girl did not answer the phone. Also testifying was investigator Tom from the Orange County Sheriff's Department, who recounted the events of the night of the crime. He included details of Rossi's attempt to talk to Maria, the woman who had delivered the bag containing clothes with traces of the victim's blood. Maria confirmed before the jury that those garments belonged to the defendant. Later, Antonio himself testified that on the afternoon of June 15, 1990, he had waited outside the Wallace family home near the entrance road along with the driver, whom he didn't know and couldn't identify. They waited about 10 minutes until Rossi left the house, carrying some items. Antonio confirmed that neither he nor the driver entered the house. He also testified that Rossi had told him that she had previously lived in that house, and he initially believed her when she said the items they were carrying were hers. Antonio stated that he did not notice any blood on the girl's clothes or body, and did not learn of Otum's death until he read about it in the newspaper. Antonio resigned from his right to testify, and the defence rested without calling any witnesses. The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours before finding Rossi guilty of first-degree murder, murder during a burglary, and murder during a first-degree robbery. The jury concluded that the evidence presented against the defendant was overwhelming, including forensic evidence and Rossi's recorded confession. The next phase of the trial was to determine whether Rossi should be sentenced to life imprisonment or the death penalty. During the first hearing of the penalty phase, which began in late March 1992, the prosecution simply presented a photograph of Otum while she was alive. The defence then called several witnesses who testified on Rossi's behalf. At this stage of the trial, the defence could only attempt to save Rossi's life by appealing to the jury's empathy. Sylvia, Rossi's mother, spoke about the difficult childhood and adolescence her daughter had, which she believed led to her involvement with drugs. She explained that she had tried numerous times to help Rossi, but she was unsuccessful. Just days before the crime, Sylvia had begged her daughter to turn her life around. She recalled how she had taken Rossi to a rehabilitation program, but the young woman had been discharged after only 10 days because her medical insurance had expired. Sylvia also testified about her efforts to involve her grandchildren in visiting their mother in prison, a practice she promised to continue. Manuel Cueva, Rossi's partner and the father of her children, also spoke. He described Rossi as a loving and affectionate mother. He assured the court that after her arrest, Rossi continued to show concern for her children. He explained that she had maintained contact with them by writing letters and speaking to them when they visited her in prison. Janelle Lear, a childhood friend of Rossi, also took the stand. She spoke about Rossi's difficult upbringing, noting that her father was a violent alcoholic who abandoned the family. Janelle said that Rossi had written her from jail about the importance of staying away from drugs and living a law-abiding life. Janelle also recalled that Rossi had called her from jail and expressed that Otum did not deserve to die. According to the defendant's witness, Rossi stated that she never planned to harm the victim. The next witness, Tamara Benedict, a childhood neighbour of Rossi, testified that her father was violent. She explained that Rossi had tried drugs but was not successful, and at times she was able to find temporary work but struggled to maintain it due to her addiction. Betty Clearly, the manager of a fast-food restaurant where Rossi worked for a time, testified that Rossi was a good employee, reliable and pleasant. Next, Sylvia Archuleta, from a Christian program called Teen Challenge, which translates as Adolescent Challenge, testified. She met Rossi while she was in the Orange County prison. Archuleta shared that Rossi expressed deep sadness and remorse for the pain she caused the victim's family. Dr. Armando Morales, an expert in psychology, also testified. According to his investigation, Rossi had a relatively stable childhood until she was 5 years old. After that, her father began to abuse her, and she suffered sexual violence at just 9 years old. Additionally, she faced racism at school and eventually turned to drugs. Dr. Morales opined that Rossi developed emotional problems related to these traumas, which led her to abuse narcotics. However, he believed that she was capable of forming close relationships and being a positive influence on others. Dr. Morales also testified that Rossi showed remorse and empathy for the victim and her family. During the trial, Rossi shared her difficult family life with the jury, describing her alcoholic and violent father, the racial prejudices she endured, and her drug addiction. She explained that financial struggles led her to engage in prostitution, and she soon became addicted to drugs. Rossi detailed the extent of her substance abuse issues and spoke about her mother's efforts to help her overcome them. In a letter, Rossi expressed how deeply she regretted taking the life of an innocent person. The prosecution withdrew its initial stance, acknowledging that Rossi's crime warranted the death penalty. A state representative argued that the brutal nature of the act spoke for itself. During the first penalty hearing, the jury voted 10-2 in favour of capital punishment. However, by April 1992, after it became clear that a unanimous verdict was unlikely, the court declared the penalty phase a mistrial. In mid-May of the same year, a second jury was formed to hear the case again. In this second penalty phase, the prosecution called several witnesses, including Christina, Otum's friend, who had been with her on the day of the crime, as well as Otum's sisters, April and Linda, who testified about the pain they had endured due to the victim's death. The prosecution also presented testimony from most of the witnesses who had testified during the first phase of the trial. On this occasion, the defendant refrained from testifying, but the defence called new witnesses to speak in Rossi's favour. Mark Taylor, a criminalist, testified that he had examined evidence collected at the crime scene and pointed out that some of the shoe prints found inside and outside the house did not match Rossi's footwear. Toby Silver, a registered mental health professional from Orange County, testified that during his sessions with Rossi, she exhibited signs of depression and low self-esteem. He also stated that she expressed remorse for her actions and missed her children. Gerardo Rangel, a bilingual school counsellor who had met Rossi during high school, testified that he had tried to help her by registering her in educational programs, but the family could not afford them. The defence lawyer also called Dr. Consuelo Edwards, a mental health expert who described Rossi's intellectual functioning as limited. She estimated Rossi's IQ to be 78 and noted learning problems that had been worsened by her traumatic childhood experiences. Dr. Edwards concluded that Rossi had been legally sane at the time of the crime, but suffered from a continuous organic mental disorder, was under the influence of drugs and had a history of attention deficit disorder, learning difficulties, behaviour disorders, anxiety, and dependent personality disorder. She believed that Rossi did not intend to commit the crime and had the potential to change and improve. The prosecution refuted these assessments by presenting testimony from several employees of the Orange County Prison. These assessments were refuted when several employees from the Orange County Prison testified. One employee claimed to have witnessed Rossi hitting an inmate, while others testified that Rossi had expressed frustration, saying she struggled with people and just wanted to end everything. On July 20, 1992, the second jury unanimously recommended the death sentence for Maria del Rocio Alfaro. Her defense attorney, William Monroe, appealed for a life imprisonment sentence instead, arguing that Rossi's youth, drug addiction and role as a mother to 4 young children should be considered. Monroe believed the jury had made an error in recommending the death penalty. However, the Superior Court judge dismissed the defence's arguments, stating that Rossi had made her own choices in life and could not blame others for her actions. The judge also doubted that Rossi would be able to properly care for her children outside of prison, given the evidence presented. Outside the courtroom, William Munro expressed his belief that racial prejudice had influenced the jury's decision, arguing that a predominantly white jury could not understand or empathise with a Latin woman trapped in the drug world. After the sentencing, Rossi filed a formal complaint against the court, accusing it of making a mistake when she wanted to declare herself guilty but was not allowed to by her attorney. Rossi insisted on pleading guilty, but her lawyer opposed it, choosing to present a defence that hindered Rossi's ability to show remorse and accept responsibility. The court noted that Rossi had asked to plead guilty, but without any conditions. The Attorney General countered, stating that Rossi wanted to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole, which the prosecution had rejected. The prosecution reminded the court that when Rossi was arrested in June 1990, she had waived her right to a lawyer and had agreed to be questioned. During the penalty phase hearings, the district prosecutor argued that Rossi had never accepted responsibility for the crime and had shown no remorse. The court denied the motion to alter the penalty and upheld the death sentence. The procedure for executing a death sentence is lengthy and complex. An automatic appeal process begins, sending the case directly to the California Supreme Court for review. If the sentence is upheld, the case moves to another round of appeals in the federal justice system. Linda, along with her 2 surviving daughters, dedicated time and energy to ensure justice for Otum. Charles, the prosecutor assigned to the case, had warned the Wallace family before the initial trial that it could take more than 20 years for a death penalty case to reach its conclusion. In 2007, Linda and her daughters remained active in the case, travelling to San Francisco when the lawyers argued whether Rossi's death sentence was justified. Although April also travelled to San Francisco for the discussion, she was unable to arrive in time. Amber expressed in an interview the frustration she felt over Rossi's continued advantage, given that the criminal had received numerous appeals and sanction hearings, while the victim's family was left in suffering, waiting for justice. On August 6, 2007, after 17 years, the California Supreme Court concluded its review of the appeal and upheld the death sentence. However, in 2014, District Judge Cormac Carney overturned the sentence, stating that the long waits faced by prisoners on death row in California amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. 3 years later, on July 14, 2017, a federal court of appeals upheld the death sentence. Maria del Rocio Alfaro became the first woman in California to be sentenced to the gas chamber. At the time of her sentence, she was one of 3 women on death row in the state, alongside Cynthia Lynn Kaufman, sentenced in 1986, and Maureen McDermott, sentenced in 1990. Since the death penalty was reinstated in California in 1978, over 900 people have been sentenced to death, but only 13 have been executed. As of the time of this video, Rossi, aged over 50, remains on death row at San Quentin Prison, awaiting her final judgment.
2 friends decided to ride their scooters to the store to treat themselves to something tasty. However, this simple trip led to a tragedy that shocked many. Over the years, the case took many unexpected turns that were sometimes difficult to understand. The end of this story was completely unpredictable. Michaela Garecht was born on January 24, 1979 in Oakland, California. She was the long-awaited first child of the family, as her parents had tried for 5 years to have a child before they succeeded. Shortly after Michaela's birth, the family expanded to include 2 more children and moved to the quiet suburb of Hayward. This place was ideal for the tranquil life of a large family. Michaela was a happy child. She liked to play with her brother and sister and spent a lot of time with her best friend, Katrina. The girls lived almost across the street from each other and often met and played near their houses. On November 19, 1988, Michaela and Katrina were running between their houses, trying on different costumes for a school play. Both were in a great mood, as the first days of the Thanksgiving holiday had started. At about 10 a.m., Katrina's father gave her a coin to buy candy. The girls excitedly went to Michaela's house to ask her mother for permission to go to the nearest shop, which was less than a kilometer away. Michaela's mother reluctantly agreed, as the girls had never gone to the shop without adults or older friends before. But after Michaela's persistent requests, she gave permission on the condition that they would return home immediately after shopping. Michaela's mother was always worried about her safety, as Michaela was her first and long-awaited child, whose birth the parents considered a miracle. That day, the woman decided that nothing bad would happen, as the shop was only a few hundred meters from the house and the girls were planning to go there on their scooters. Michaela ran to Katrina to get 2 scooters, hers and her brother's. The friends went to the shop, parked the scooters nearby, and went inside to shop. When the girls came out of the shop, they started talking and forgot about the scooters. They went home but quickly remembered the scooters and returned to the place where they had left them. To their surprise, Michaela's scooter was no longer there. They thought someone might have moved it and decided to search the area around the shop. Michaela walked along the parking lot and soon noticed her scooter next to a car parked nearby. She walked towards it, but after a few seconds, Katrina heard a loud noise. Katrina ran back and saw an unknown man trying to drive away with Michaela. The man quickly got behind the wheel and drove away. Katrina ran into the store and told the saleswoman what had happened. The saleswoman immediately called the police, and the officers were on site within a few minutes. Then she called Michaela's father and reported what had happened. Michaela's father immediately came with Katrina's father to the store, where the investigators were already working. He also told his wife to stay at home next to the phone and wait for a call from the police. The investigators had many tasks ahead of them. It turned out that there were no surveillance cameras near the store, and the only witness was Katrina, who was in shock and could hardly speak. The officers also spoke to the cashier of the store, who provided the first important information. The woman said that shortly before the incident, there was a suspicious man in front of the store. He parked and got out of his car, but did not go inside. Instead, he loitered around the building, looked through the windows, and watched passers-by. The cashier noticed his suspicious behavior and thought he was up to no good. According to her statement, he was a white man, about 30 years old, with a large mustache. He was driving an old dark red car, but she could not identify the model or the license plate. Based on her information, the police created an identikit of the suspect and distributed it to all newspapers and TV stations. From the beginning, news of the incident spread throughout the city and beyond. People were shocked that something like this could happen in broad daylight. The description of the man and his car was passed on to hundreds of patrol officers throughout the district, who began stopping all similar cars in the hope of finding Michaela. The investigators sent the scooter for forensic examination, believing that the suspect Michaela and Katrina had noticed when they drove to the store had deliberately brought one of the scooters to the back door of his car to carry out his plan. His fingerprints might have remained on it. The forensic scientists confirmed this suspicion by finding a print that did not belong to any of Katrina's family members and clearly did not match Michaela. However, the problem was that the print was incomplete. The experts only managed to take about 10% of the entire print, which made the task considerably more difficult in those years. This incomplete print was not enough to search databases, so the police could only hope for a direct comparison with suspects. In the evening, the FBI got involved in the investigation. Hayward and the surrounding towns had an increasing number of missing people, and the FBI immediately suspected a connection with this case. Despite their involvement in active media coverage, they could not get any closer to solving the case. Michaela's parents were heartbroken, especially her mother, who blamed herself for what had happened. She remembered a strange detail that worried her. A week before the disappearance, she had woken up early in the morning and seen Michaela at the dining table in the kitchen. This was unusual, as Michaela did not normally get up so early. When her mother asked her why she was awake, Michaela replied that she was writing a poem but did not give any details as she was very sleepy. After some questions from her mother, she explained that she had been woken up by a noise in the attic and decided to write a poem about people who are stuck in attics. Michaela added that her work was dedicated to those who spend a lot of time in attics. Her mother was surprised to hear this from her daughter at the time, but after her disappearance it seemed almost mystical. The woman came to believe that Michaela had unknowingly predicted her own fate. In the first 2 days after the disappearance, the police did everything they could to find the suspect or his car, searching the city, but without success. Then they remembered Katrina, who had been so shocked that she could hardly speak.
After 2 days of fruitless searching, they decided it was time to visit her home, where an unexpected turn of events awaited them. Katrina, who had witnessed the incident and the abductor, provided a completely different description than initially given. According to her statement, the suspect was a young man, about 20 years old, with long, dirty blonde hair down to his shoulders and acne on his face. She also noticed his blue eyes, which she described as fox-like. Additionally, she recalled details about his car, a beige sedan with a straight shape and lots of dents. The police realized that the cashier had described a different suspicious person near the store. Katrina's description detailed a completely different man and car, which posed a serious problem for the investigation. Consequently, they had sent a false composite photo to the media and patrol officers, causing everyone to look for the wrong person during the critical first 48 hours of the case. Based on Katrina's description, a new composite photo was created and distributed. The police also began searching for men with criminal records in the area. Dozens of volunteers joined the search, combing through homes, questioning residents, and distributing thousands of leaflets with Michaela's photo and a description of the situation. In the first few days alone, 42,000 leaflets were handed out. A few days later, they received an important tip. 3 hikers in a large national park near the city contacted the police after noticing tracks on the ground, realizing one pair belonged to an adult and the other to a child. Following the tracks, they found a blanket and empty fast food packaging in the middle of the forest. The police suspected the traces might belong to Michaela. A psychological profile created by FBI experts suggested that the perpetrator would likely choose a remote location, making the park a fitting site. Investigators searched the park extensively, both on foot and with helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras. However, these efforts yielded no results. The police continued to search other parks, mountains, and remote locations without success. Due to nationwide coverage, an enormous amount of tips flooded in. In the first 10 months of the investigation, about 4,000 tips were received.
Checking each one was extremely difficult. The case was intensely discussed in San Francisco and surrounding cities, with well-known athletes making public appeals for information to help the police. A significant reward of $70,000 was offered, and Michaela's photo appeared on 1 million milk cartons across the state. Despite widespread community involvement and numerous tips, investigators made no progress. At the end of December, a month and a half after the search began, the police admitted that the only result was that several thousand tips had been checked. Since then, the situation remained unchanged for many months. The police continued to receive numerous tips and follow them up. Even Michaela's mother conducted her own investigations, studying similar cases and trying to identify the perpetrator. Everyone hoped that the case would be solved and Michaela would return home. In 1991, investigators turned their attention to Timothy Binder, who was 43 years old at the time. With each new detail about him, an increasingly disturbing picture emerged. Even before the incident with Michaela, Binder was already on the police's radar. They noticed he sent gifts and money to many girls, often including Bible quotes with underlined sentences like, "I chose you and be with me." Some of the girl's parents contacted the police and Binder was questioned. He claimed that he only wanted to build friendly relationships. During the investigation, it emerged that he had been fired from social services in Colorado in 1985 for collecting addresses and personal information from clients, to whom he later sent gifts and letters. The police searched his van and found many photos and Bible excerpts scattered inside. It turned out that he had already been arrested for inviting someone into his van, but no charges were filed. Binder also frequently visited cemeteries and spent a lot of time there. Even more disturbing facts came to light when it was revealed that half a year before the Michaela case, a girl named Amber had disappeared near her town. Binder contacted her mother, offered help, and often visited her at home. He also wrote a letter to the police predicting future crimes. When the search for Michaela began, Binder frequently called Michaela's mother, visited her at home, and offered help. In December 1988, he sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler with a girl showing 4 fingers. A few weeks later, he again guessed the age of the next missing girl. Despite the series of strange facts that led to indirect evidence, investigators obtained a search warrant for his home, where he lived with his wife, but they found no evidence linking him to the crimes. When information about Binder's suspicious behavior hit the newspapers, the public began to blame him for all similar cases in the city. This made his life difficult, and he threatened his family. Authorities and the police never connected him to any crimes. His actions were considered suspicious but not dangerous. As a result, police focused on finding other suspects. A new serious lead did not surface until December 1992, 4 years after Michaela's disappearance. An Indiana inmate serving an 11-year sentence contacted the police and claimed he knew who had committed the crime. He stated that he had helped hide evidence in the park. Initially, investigators ignored him, but the inmate wrote a letter to one of San Francisco's leading newspapers. After his story was published, the police were heavily criticized. Under public pressure, they decided to question the inmate. He promised not only to show the location of the evidence, but also to lead them to the culprit. He was taken to California and went to the location with the officers. The inmate claimed that the evidence was buried in a field of gladiolus, and the officers concentrated all their efforts on this area. The search lasted from 8 a.m. until the inmate suddenly admitted that he had made it all up. He explained that he wanted to give Michaela's family comfort and the opportunity to move on. Instead, the relatives were devastated. The girl and the police were furious. The inmate received an additional 6.5 years in prison, increasing his sentence to almost 20 years. He was also required to pay Michaela's family $6,000 in restitution. The next suspect emerged in August 2000 when the police arrested Curtis Anderson, who was suspected of a similar crime committed in Valero a year earlier. He confessed and was sent to prison, but investigators suspected he might be involved in other cases. This was not confirmed until 7 years later when Curtis contacted the FBI. Suffering from serious health problems, he stated he wanted to confess to more crimes. He claimed involvement in 13 other incidents, one of which involved Amber, who had disappeared 6 months before Michaela. Curtis provided enough precise details for investigators to conclude his involvement, but no physical evidence could prove his guilt. As for Michaela, Curtis denied any involvement, even though he drove a car that matched Katrina's description. FBI agents planned to continue interrogating Curtis, but faced difficulties. A new suspect emerged in 2012. Police received information from an inmate who claimed his cellmate, Lauren Herzog, resembled the suspect in Michaela's case. Investigators were interested as Lauren and his accomplice had already been imprisoned for other crimes. They were suspected in 19 cases, though only some could be proven. A month before Lauren's cellmate contacted the police, Lauren had experienced a similar situation as Curtis, but investigators decided to check his involvement. Young photos of Lauren looked similar to the composite image, but additional evidence was required. It was decided to dig up a well where Lauren and his accomplice had hidden evidence. Several thousand items were found and examined by experts, revealing connections to cases of 5 other girls, but none matched Michaela's DNA. After examining other wells, no evidence of Lauren's involvement was found. A new clue emerged in 2018 when David Mitch was accused of a crime committed in 1986 near Michaela's home. Suspicions about Mitch increased due to modern DNA analysis technologies. Biological material found under the nails of 2 girls after the incident, which could not be examined at the time, was now analyzed and linked Mitch to these cases. At the time of the new accusations, Mitch was already in prison. Investigators decided to check his involvement in Michaela's case and found that David was in the same area at the time of the incident. He also matched Katrina's description and owned a similar car. Since his fingerprints were in the database, experts decided to re-examine the partial print from Michaela's scooter. Using modern technologies, they made a breakthrough. The print from the scooter matched Mitch's fingerprints completely. In 2020, Mitch was heavily charged, as the hope of finding Michaela had almost died. He categorically refused to admit his guilt, and the case was brought to court. In early 2023, preliminary hearings took place, where the judge decided that the evidence against Mitch was sufficient to start the trial. Mitch's lawyer tried to challenge the evidence, claiming that the fingerprint on the scooter did not prove his client's involvement in the crime. This claim, however, seemed questionable since the scooter was intentionally placed at the back door of the car to create a false impression. The lawyer also denied the first-degree charge, stating that the absence of key evidence meant the absence of proof. However, this claim is no longer relevant today. In the past, such charges without key evidence were rare, but today the approach has changed. If there is enough indirect evidence, a tragic outcome can be almost certain. Additionally, Mitch has shown a penchant for crime throughout his life. The girl's father traveled from another state to attend the press conference announcing Mitch's arrest. Michaela's mother, who had hoped all these years to find her daughter, was unable to come due to serious health problems. She did not attend the trial, but thanked the investigators for their persistence in finding the truth despite the long years. The police stated they would continue to search for key evidence and offered a reward of $10,000 for any useful information. The trial against Mitch is set to begin soon. The 3 cases include Michaela's case and 2 other girls under whose nails his DNA was found. Initially, the prosecution planned to seek a severe sentence, but then the district attorney in this jurisdiction changed. The new prosecutor, Pamela Price, altered the decision. Now, even if Mitch is found guilty in all 3 cases, he will no longer face a life sentence, but only a few more decades in prison. This decision caused discontent among the relatives and became a controversial topic in the media, with Mitch's lawyer being the only supporter. However, since Mitch is already 62 years old, he has little chance of getting out of prison.